This is a quick review of a Java Spring Boot jersey set up for Reveal. Remember, Reveal works off of a handful of interfaces that you inject in your jersey config. We have an authentication provider, a data source provider, the user context provider, the dashboard provider, and the object filter. They all work hand in hand to manage the requests from the client for dashboards. So first, let's take a look at the authentication provider. The authentication provider for, in this case, Databricks, has several different options for authenticating. There's a bearer token, the Microsoft Entra ID data source, or a personal access token. In my case here, I'm going to use a personal access token, and I'm pulling in a credential, which I'm storing in my user context. So the user context is where you can centralize property settings that you use across Reveal functions. Each Reveal function has the user context as a parameter. So for example, resolve credentials as the user context. Now, if we take a look at the user context just to see what's going on there, you'll note that I'm picking up some values from my application properties. So I have all of my properties for authenticating to my database, my port, etc., stored in the application properties. And then I'm pulling those into the user context and using them elsewhere in the application. So the user context pulls in the HTTP request, which is coming in from the client. In my sample here, I have a single clear text header called xheader1, and that just includes a customer ID value. What I'm doing here is I'm saying if there is no value, default to blonde P. I'm going to use this user ID in a couple other places, notably for row level security in queries. And also I'm setting up this concept of a role, either an admin or a user role. So blonde P is going to be my admin role. I am putting the role and my credential for my authentication into this user context object, which has a default user ID property. And then, of course, this key value pair, this dictionary object here, and those are going to be used in the application. So I have my authentication, I have my user context being pulled in from the client. Now I need to connect to my data source, and that happens with the data source provider. So you'll note here, I am grabbing, again, more connection information from my application properties, and I'm going to use those in my change data source. Here, I am just setting those properties for all of the Databricks connection settings. I have a host, a port, path, database, and schema. You could store these values anywhere. I'm storing them here for this sample application. You might have them in a key vault. They might be based on who the incoming user request is for. You may have looked up these properties in the user context based on some token for the logged in user to your application. So up to you how you set the data source. And then if you remember, the change data source item allows you to customize queries on incoming requests. So if I look at the change data source item here, remember I do have a user context as the parameter, and I am looking at the ID of the incoming request from the client. So here I'm saying if the ID equals all invoices, I want to set the table to invoices. If the ID is customer invoices, I'm going to do a custom query. So you have the ability to do custom queries, to change the table, etc., based on the request coming in from the client. This code here, the change data source, is required every time you call change data source item. So this line of code is required, and we validate again the database properties for this user. So that's all I need to do to get started with a basic implementation. So if I go to my index.ds.html on the client side, in this case, I have my reveal view, which again is just a div on the page. And I'm going to use that reveal view to load or create a dashboard. We have 3 dependencies: jQuery, day.js, and then of course the reveal library. I'm telling my client where the server is located. I'm running at localhost 5111. I want my reveal view to be this div. I tell it to start in edit mode. And then in the on data sources requested, I'm just setting up a definition for my data source. And when a user clicks on this icon in the data sources dialog, the callback occurs. I send this to the server. I go through the authentication and the IRV data source provider to then give me the database back. So if we go to our server here. We're at our Spring Boot Jersey server. Let's go ahead and run this guy. I'll go to my index DS. We'll right click, open this up in the browser. I'll click plus visualization. I have my data sources dialog. Let's go ahead and click my Databricks. This goes to the server, authenticates, and now it gives me all of the objects back that I'm allowed to see from the database. So here we can preview the data from a specific table. You can see I've got some fields here. I can check out, see if there's anything here I want to do a visualization on. I got my invoices. So this just gives you the preview of what you can do. In terms of this list, remember, using the object filter, I can filter out this list based on something that I set up, which is what I'm going to do with that role that I set up in the user context provider. I'm going to limit this list. So right now, I have logged in as Blom P by default. Blom P is an admin. So the admin is allowed to see this information. So if I select invoices, let's do country. And let's do freight by country. And that looks good. Now let's add a fixed line. Let's take a look and see the average freight across country. I want to modify this a little bit. So I'll click freight. I'm going to say here total freight. And my aggregation, sorting, everything will stay the same for formatting. I'm going to say use a currency and use large number formatting. I'll update that field. That looks pretty good. And I want to do now the same for my average. I want it to pop a little bit. So I'm going to change it to yellow color, and we'll do a dotted line. I'm also going to set large number formatting, and I'm going to make this a currency. We'll update that, and now that looks good. Let's call this freight by country. I'll check the box. Now I want to do something a little bit different, so I'm just going to duplicate that guy. I'm going to edit it. I'm going to go and change the chart type to a map. So let's go and grab a choropleth map. This will swap out my settings here. I'm going to choose the world countries. And now I just have a slightly different view. I'll check the box. We can leave the title as new dashboard. I won't add any filters. And I'm going to go ahead and check the box. So what did that just do? If we go back to our Java app, remember that the dashboards folder is where I was saving items. So new dashboard.r- was the name of our dashboard. How did that work? Well, I'm using the dashboard provider, which is getting dashboards and saving dashboards. And you can see here that I'm actually telling it where to save and what to save. But I also have the user context here. So if I wanted to save this to a special folder based on some user context, if I wanted to change this to save to a database, I could do whatever I want. This is where that gets controlled. So now that I've saved this R-, how do I load it? So let's go to load dashboard. You can see here, I have the same dependencies. I have a reveal view. The only difference here is instead of on data sources requested, I'm calling load dashboard. What do I want to load? I want to load new dashboard. I'm going to right click, open this up in the browser, and we'll see what we just created. So now if I edit this and I change this feature to something maybe like a different color, and I check the box, do a refresh, that's automatically going to overwrite because that's what I'm telling it to do in that dashboard provider. So what if I want to do something a little bit more sophisticated and I want to use the items in the changeDataSourceItem? So I want to have a request for all invoices or customer invoices, and I want to use this user context. What if I want to limit what shows up in that data sources dialog with the object filter? So if I take a look at the object filter, which is using the IRV object filter interface, it has two functions, filter and filter. One is for data source items and one is for data sources. So what I'm going to do here for the data source items is I'm going to use that role property that we created in the user context. And based on the role, be it an admin or a user, I'm going to have some allowed tables here. So you'll see if it's an admin, I want to allow customers, invoices, order details, orders, and products. If it's a user, I just want them to see customers and invoices. And the reason I'm even limiting this on the admin side is because in my Databricks database, there's a bunch of other test tables and other things that no one really needs to see. So the object filter is going to get fired as well. Why are these things getting fired? Because if you remember in my Jersey config, I have them injected into the application. If I didn't want this, I would get rid of it. but I do want it. So I'm going to use that object filter. So if I go to indexdsi.html, this is set up a little bit different. So how do I get that user context from the client to the server? Well, that's where the set additional headers provider comes into play. The set additional headers provider will return anything to the server or pass anything I want to the server with every request that Reveal makes from the client to the server. So in my case, if we scroll up, I have a list of these customer IDs, and that's what's getting picked up as the user ID through the set additional headers provider on the server. So I am saying, hey, grab that selected customer, set it to X header 1, which is in my headers array, and that's going to get sent to the server. And then here, this looks familiar from my previous indexds.html, which is just setting up the data source. But you'll notice here, I have two data source items that are using this data source, one called all invoices, one called customer invoices, and these IDs are going to be looked at in my data source provider. So if the incoming ID is all invoices, I want to set the table to just invoices. If it's customer invoices, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do an ad hoc query. And in that ad hoc query, I am going to use my user context.user ID for just selecting what this user is actually allowed to see. So we'll go back here, and on my callback, there's actually two arrays. There's the data source, the data sources, and then the data source items. In this case, I'm not showing the data source, so let's see what that looks like. I'll open this up in the browser. I'll click plus visualization. You'll notice I had Elfkey picked up here, so let's click all invoices. And what we should see here is just all of the invoices table. There was no filter happening. So if I just drag customer ID, we're going to see all of the customer IDs that have invoices. So Anton, Anatar, etc. If I close this out, discard, plus visualization, selected customer invoices. Remember, I'm logged in as Elfkey. So this comes up, and now let's change this to a grid. We'll grab customer ID, and we will only see Elfkey here. So you'll note that that's all I get is not even one page of Elfkeys. So let's close this out. Let's change this to BlampP, and BlampP, same thing. All invoices, I'll get everyone. Let's just click select customer invoices, go to a grid, grab customer ID, and we see all of the BlampP. So where does that object filter come into play? So this was straightforward. We just used our data source items, and they executed the correct item on the server. So let's here change or add actually the Databricks source, which is this guy here, to the first array. I'm going to right click, view it in the browser, click plus visualization. Oh, there's my Databricks database. I'll click this guy. Now you'll see I only see customers and invoices, which is okay. If I select this, not a lot here to do a dashboard or a visualization on, but I can add fields from another data source, select invoices, and then match the customer ID to the customer ID here, which let me do a search. I'm pretty sure there's got to be a customer ID here. Yep. And I want to grab maybe the shipper name, and yeah, we have freight. So let's grab the freight as well. Click join data. So now let's do country, freight by country. That took data from my source customers table, my invoices table, did a join on the server, executed in my Databricks database, and created this guy. So let me discard this and let me log in as BlampP, who is that admin. Let's click plus visualization, click my Databricks, and you'll see that I have all of these tables available to me, different than BlampP. If I go back to my server, and let's stop our server, let's go back to our Jersey config. I'm going to comment out the object filter altogether, and let's go ahead and run this again. And I'll just go back to indexds, which will just give me my whole Databricks database. Let's right click, view this in the browser, plus visualization. There's my database. And now you can see that I have a bunch of different tables that you didn't see before, test data types, test Booleans, et cetera, et cetera. So that is all of the tables in my Databricks database. So using the object filter in conjunction with the data sources dialog, or just using data source items, you can customize what you're choosing to go and create visualizations with. And that is how you would set up a Java server and execute requests from the client.